You can listen to these stories in daylight, but if it's already night, turn this off, because they don't like being spoken of in the dark. My name is Ranger Daniel Harkins. For 3 decades, I served the backcountry of northern Montana, patrolling over 500,000 acres of wilderness where the map ends and the trail markers vanish. I thought I knew the land, its ridges, its rivers, its seasonal moods. But even now, years after hanging up my badge, I still wake in the night with the sound of footsteps circling my bed. Footsteps that don't belong to anyone in my house. When you serve long enough as a ranger, you're not just a guide or an enforcer of rules. You become a witness. You see the things that aren't supposed to exist on record. Missing hikers who never should have gotten lost in the first place. Campsites abandoned so quickly the fire was still burning. Boots left neatly side by side in the dirt, as if their owner had stepped right out of them and walked off barefoot into the trees. I logged these cases. I wrote the reports. But I never stopped hearing the same question echo in my head. Why? Why do people vanish in the same places, on the same nights, always under the same circumstances? The elders from the nearby towns never spoke about legends lightly. They told me once, quietly, without looking me in the eyes, that some stories aren't warnings. They're boundaries. Spoken reminders of where not to go, of what not to disturb. I laughed it off, like most young rangers do, until I found myself staring at claw marks on a tree far too high for any bear to have left. Until I followed tracks that started out human and ended in something else entirely. You need to understand, this isn't entertainment to me. These stories don't fade when the video ends. They are stitched into the ground out there, as real as the moss growing over forgotten headstones. And there's a reason I'm warning you at the start. The men I worked beside, the ones who disappeared without good explanation, they all shared the same habit. They liked to tell the stories after dark. They thought they were swapping harmless tales. But you'll notice, none of them told a second one. So, if you're still here, if you didn't turn this off when I gave you the chance, then listen closely. Every sound you hear in the background, we bring you the voices that were silenced, the cases that were buried, the warnings that were ignored. And if you come back for the next chapter, maybe you'll notice what others don't. Maybe you'll see the patterns in the shadows before it's too late. So, keep your lights on if you must. Put your headphones on. And remember, these are not campfire stories. These are truths told by those of us who survived long enough to regret it. I'm still here, and that's the only reason you get to hear what comes next. I want to tell you about a trail we used to keep open on the north side of the range. Locals called it the Ridgeway Path. Nothing remarkable on the maps, just a narrow dirt stretch cutting between 2 steep slopes. I hiked it countless times, until one autumn evening when I noticed something I couldn't explain. The ground beneath my boots seemed to rise, and then fall. Not like loose soil shifting, but as though the earth itself was moving in a steady rhythm. Up, down, up again. I stopped dead in my tracks, crouched low, and laid my palm flat against the dirt. What I felt wasn't a trick of the wind. It was slow, steady, breathing. I stood there longer than I should have, trying to make sense of it. No seismic activity was recorded. No tunneling animals could have caused the trail to pulse beneath my hand. And yet, every few seconds, I felt it. Expanding, receding, like something massive lived under that path, inhaling the air I was standing on. At first, I kept it to myself. A ranger doesn't file a report about a trail that breathes. But hikers began to talk. They said that at night, if you walked Ridgeway alone, you'd hear panting behind you, always in sync with your own footsteps. Stop, and the sound would stop. Start again, and it was right there with you. One man came out of those woods white as bone. He swore he'd felt hot breath on the back of his neck, said it pushed his hair forward, damp and heavy, like something towering over him was leaning close. When he spun around, there was nothing, just the dark trail, motionless pines, and silence. But he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was hadn't stopped breathing. It had only held its breath, waiting for him to move again. We closed the path last year. If you're still listening, if you want to hear the rest, subscribe to MindFuel. Every story we uncover is another reminder that the forest holds more than trees, and the next chapter is waiting, just ahead on the trail. There's another report I'll never forget. 2 young campers, fresh out of college, set up their tent along the Timberline Creek. They built a fire, cooked their dinner, and fell asleep to the sound of water rushing over stone. It was supposed to be a simple night out. Sometime after midnight, both of them stirred awake. Their fire was still burning, the embers glowing bright as if they'd just been stoked. But the forest around them was dead silent. No wind, no water, not even a single cricket. One of them told me later it was like the world had been muted. As they sat up, rubbing the sleep from their eyes, they noticed something else. Around the fire, on the dirt, there were shadows, not their own. They checked quickly, counted. 2 men, 2 shadows. But the firelight was throwing more. The shapes leaned, stretched, and bent at strange angles, as if cast by people standing just outside the reach of the flames. One camper stood and tried to make sense of it, thinking it was a trick of the wood smoke or a shifting branch. But the more he studied them, the clearer it became. The shadows weren't matching their movements. They were moving slow, deliberately out of sync. When he raised his arm, the shadow across the fire lowered its own. When he leaned forward, one leaned back. Opposite. Intentional. That was the moment they panicked. They grabbed their packs, snuffed out the fire with dirt, and ran. Their shouts broke the silence, echoing through the trees, but no one came to help. By dawn, only one of them stumbled out to the ranger station. Clothes torn, eyes hollow. He could barely speak, but what he managed to say still chills me. It was trying to keep us there. We searched for his friend for 3 days, found him on the 4th. He was seated at the very fire pit they'd abandoned, cross-legged like a man warming himself. The logs around him were blackened to ash, long cold. But the strangest part, he still cast a shadow. Sitting there in broad daylight, with nothing above him but empty sky. There's a place some hikers stumble across that isn't marked on any trail map. I heard it first from a man who came into my station, pale, trembling, swearing he'd walked into something he was never meant to see. He said he'd been following a ridgeline when he found it. A cabin deep in the woods, half-built, no path leading to it, no sign that anyone had ever hauled lumber that far. The logs were stacked, the roof beams set, but the structure just stopped. Walls unfinished, windows open to the trees. Curiosity pulled him closer. Inside, he found what you'd expect in a work site. Tools scattered, wood shavings on the floor, the frame of a table half-carved. But when he touched one of the chisels, it was warm. The hammer lying across the log still felt as though it had just been in someone's hand. Then he saw the journals, leather-bound, stacked neatly on the makeshift table. At first he thought they were construction notes, but when he opened one, the handwriting froze him in place. It was his own. His name written at the top of the page, his loops and lines unmistakable. Page after page, entries described things he hadn't yet done, conversations he hadn't had, places he hadn't been. They unfolded like a diary from a future he hadn't lived. His breath caught when he reached the last entry. The ink was still wet, the letters sharp, the message simple. You shouldn't have come inside. They're already behind you. That was enough. He ran, didn't look back, didn't stop until daylight poured through the trees. He thought he'd left it behind him, that cabin, those journals, the hammer that should have been cold but wasn't. But weeks later, lying in bed, he opened his phone to check the maps. And there it was. A marker in the woods. A cabin pin that hadn't been there before. Every time he checked his GPS at night, the symbol appeared again, no matter how many times he deleted it. Always in the same place. He told me he'll never set foot near that ridge again. But he knows the cabin is waiting. Half finished, tools still warm, pages still turning without him. And if you're wondering whether you'd be curious enough to find it, ask yourself this. If the cabin suddenly appeared on your own map tonight, could you resist? If you've made it this far, it's already too late, because these stories weren't meant to be heard at night. I warned you at the beginning, told you that speaking their names after dark wasn't wise, but you kept listening. You let them in. Do you hear it now? That shift in the air around you, the silence between my words. It isn't empty. It's breathing, slow, steady, closer with every second. You don't have to imagine it. It's already pacing the room with you. I've told you what I could. I've given you the voices of the ones who came back just long enough to share what they'd seen. But you chose to stay. And that means you're not just a listener anymore. You're part of the story now. Don't bother turning on another light. Don't bother checking the locks. What follows isn't stopped by doors or walls. And before the final silence falls, I'll leave you with one last piece of advice. Subscribe to MindFuel, not because it will save you, but because it may be the only way to understand what's already taken notice of you. Every story we share brings you closer to the truth, closer to what waits in the dark. So listen carefully, one last time. Lean in, look behind you,